Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurasha binti Mama Effendi, and first of all, I would like to apologize for my lack of having a voice. But then today's presentation, my group members are Zulkarnain Shamil, Mama Afif Aiman, and also Fadli Fitri. We are from the class GBA 2515B. And for today's presentation, we're going to talk about the relationship of CPI and other macroeconomics variables, a case study during the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on to the introduction, towards the end of the year 2019, the whole world was shocked with one of the novel pneumonia pandemic called COVID-19. Most government bodies all over the world enacted the closure of borders and limiting mobility between the people to lessen the interaction, therefore breaking the chain of infection, which had impacted the economic severely. This is especially true on the negative impact of the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, therefore reducing the capital flows through creating uncertainty and lowering stock returns across the market. These stock market uncertainties led to a reduction in investment, in project funding, liquidity in the global financial system, which is a colossal issue across the globe. Moving on to the problem statement, the high consumer price index, which is the CPI, contribute to the rising of the inflation rate. This has been an ongoing problem for a while now. However, it is currently causing a huge buzz in the society, in the global society nowadays. Alas, this concern is not unjustified, as there are evident proof on the inflation rate aligning together with the CPI, which are climbing towards a very alarming rate. Rising in CPI levels and inflation rates would definitely have a tremendous effect on the daily cost of living for the common folk. This includes business activities and also individual expenditures. According to the Department of Statistics Malaysia, the inflation rate of our country in May 2022 is already at 2.2%, which is led by the increasing of the food prices. As for the research objectives, the purpose of this study is to identify the impact of the pandemic COVID-19 towards the Consumer Price Index, CPI, and the macroeconomic variables, which I will state later. The objective of this study to find out more about the first one, to determine the relationship between economic growth and CPI. The second one, to determine the relationship between exchange rate, ER, and CPI. The third one, to determine the relationship between trade openness and CPI. The fourth one, to determine the relationship between foreign direct investment and CPI. And last but not least is to determine the relationship between real interest rate and CPI. As for the dependent and independent variables, there are only one dependent variables as usual, which is the CPI. Meanwhile, we have 5 independent variables. The first one being exchange rate, the second one, FDI, foreign direct investment, the third one, interest rate, the fourth one, economic growth, the GDP, and last but not least is trade openness. That's all for me. Thank you. Next, I would like to pass to the next speaker.
For chapter 2, which is literature review, our DV we choose CPI. CPI is another economic performance indicator that is expected to be impacted by COVID-19 outbreak by Musa and Nakib 2020. This can be concluded is supported by the fact that a pandemic prompts is a lockdown request, which is detrimental to customers who depend heavily on regional goods. Most nations are restricting imports as a result of the blockade, and this has a sizable effect on CPI. For our IVs, the first is interest rate. Interest rates often change as a result of inflation and Federal Reserve policies. This can play a vital factor in deciding the amount of saving as opposed to borrowing. If interest rate is low, people will reduce saving in banks and invest more money in the market indexes. Since it is a negative relationship, an increase in the interest rate caused the prices of commodity future to fall by Ahmad 2020. Next is trade openness. Malaysia is one of the most open economies on the planet, with an exchange to GDP proportion averaging more than 130% starting around 2010. 5.6 of the Malaysian families are presently living in a outright neediness according to the latest official statistic. To satisfy the country's yearning of accomplishing big-time salary and created country status, Malaysia should progress further in schooling by World Bank 2020. Next is economic growth. The economic growth of because of COVID-19 pandemic has incited social difficulties all around planet as well as astronomically monetary unsettling influence by OECD 2020. The MCO lockdown and travel decisions have generally vexed businesses practices in various regions to restrict the monetary impact of the pandemic. So Malaysia has taken a couple of action to recover the economy. Next is exchange rate. The conversion scale is one of the macroeconomic variables that can influence stock return. The deterioration of the homegrown cash on unfamiliar monetary standards will expand on how much ringgit is utilized to pay the unfamiliar obligation. It will likewise build the cost of imported natural substance at the point where the host country money CPI declines by Kyoto and Urata 2004. Foreign direct investment is the next, which is into developing country has become more important than ever before. This is because foreign investors being access to available capital, advanced technology, and most important, the access to international market, such as studies conducted in a single nation, a group of nation, particular areas by Nantrang and Kang 2019. So based on the research conducted by other researchers to support the variables that has been studied, the substantial association between the dependent factors and the independent variables has been explained in this chapter. Understanding whether there is a positive or negative relationship between the independent factors and the dependent variable is crucial. So in the following chapter, we will talk about the research methodology that we use in this study.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Muhammad Afif Aiman. Today I would like to present about chapter 4, which is descriptive analysis. So this is the variable of macroeconomics in Malaysia. The data gathered on annually from year 2006 until 2020. So there is total 90 observations used for this research and analysis. In the figure shows the mean, average, median, maximum, minimum, standard deviation, skewness, and kurtosis for both dependent and independent variables, which is include the CPI, FDI, GDP, trade openness, real interest rate, and exchange rate. So from what we can see, the highest median and mean for this research is FDI at figure of 9.15 and 9.05. To add on, exchange rate has the lowest mean and the lowest value of median with 3.633 and 3.524. This research highest value is FDI at 1.51 and the lowest value is GDP at negative 5.6469. To compare, the highest standard deviation goes straight to trade openness with a value of 25.51 and the lowest is exchange rate at standing 0.4494. Trade openness has the highest skewness with 0.7834838 and GDP is the lowest figure at negative 2.133. So lastly, the highest kurtosis value is GDP with value of 6.4795, whereas the lowest value at 1.602 goes to exchange rate. For the next point is normality test, which is Jagdera value is 0.624 and 0.000 is the relative probability value. Since the probability is below than the significant level of 5%, the hypothesis needs to be valued using other method. Therefore, it indicates that the data have a normal distribution. The skewness score for the study is 0.3834, which indicates that the probability distribution is positive, and indicates a shorter right tail for the probability distribution. So the kurtosis is a measure of thickness of a distribution relates to its center. Based on the figure, the kurtosis value is stated as 2.3585 that indicates the distribution is standard. So in conclusion, the data in this study were normally distributed even with a negative probability observed, but the distribution channel is flat compared to normal. The next one is correlation analysis. It helps us to comprehend the significance of feature in respect to expected target class. So correlation analysis utilized in the study to establish the relationship between consumer price index and the independent variables. So for the first one, independent variables is the exchange rate. It shows that positive correlation value of 0.2351 and the p-value is higher than the 5% level of significance, which is 0.3988. It shows the exchange rate has no significant relationship with the consumer price index. The next one is foreign direct investment, FDI. It has negative correlation of value, which is negative 0.3164 towards the consumer price index. The p-value indicates that 0.2505 is higher than 5% level of significance. It shows that foreign direct investment has no significant relationship with consumer price index. The next one is gross domestic product, which is GDP. It has positive correlation value, which is 0.682648 towards the consumer price index. So it shows that GDP has a significant relationship with the CPI due to p-value, which is 0.005. The next one is interest rate. It has negative correlation of value, which is negative 0.5836 towards CPI. So the p-value indicates that 0.0224 is higher than 5% level of significant relationship with CPI. So it shows that interest rate has no significant relationship with CPI. The last one is trade openness. It has negative correlation. For the value is negative 0.2506 towards consumer price index, and the p-value indicates 0.3538 is higher than 5% level of significance. So it shows that trade openness has no significant relationship with CPI. For regression analysis, from the equation, the independent variables FDI trade openness showed a negative correlation with CPI, while exchange rate, interest rate, and GDP showed a positive correlation with CPI. F statistic value is 4.002 based on the table, and F statistic p-value is 0.03445. The value has a significance level, and the null hypothesis is not dismissed. The value of R squared is 0.6898 and adjusted R squared value is 0.517174 that has a lower than R squared. So it indicate the variable in the regression model are strong, fitting model, and can be used to predict impacts in microeconomic, which is CPI. And these variables, more information will be clarified. So from the variable exchange rate, the coefficient is 0.1690. The p-value for exchange rate is 0.8392. It shows that the exchange rate is insignificant and has a negative relationship with CPI. The null hypothesis must be discarded. As a result, changes in exchange rate would not lead to a significant impact on CPI. The next one is FDI. The coefficient value is negative 5.3. The p-value for foreign direct investment is 0.0062, and it shows that the FDI is significant and has positive relationship with CPI. The null hypothesis must not be dismissed. As a result, the FDI would lead to significant impact to CPI. So the next one is GDP. The coefficient value is 0.1644. The p-value for gross domestic product is 0.2853. So it shows that the GDP is insignificant and has a negative relationship with CPI. The null hypothesis must be regarded. As a result, changes in GDP would not lead to significant impact on CPI. The next is interest rate, which is the coefficient value is negative 0.4269, and the p-value for the interest rate is 0.0054. It shows that the GDP, the interest rate is significant and has a positive relationship with CPI. So the null hypothesis must be rejected. As a result, changes in the interest rate would lead to a significant impact on CPI. The last one is trade openness. The coefficient value is negative 0.0360, and the p-value for trade openness is 0.0637. It shows that GDP is significant and has a positive relationship with CPI. The null hypothesis must be rejected. As a result, changes in trade openness would lead to significant impact on CPI. So the summary from this chapter, based on regression analysis, there is some independent variable that do not have significant relationship with dependent variables. As a result, exchange rate, GDP have a negative relationship with CPI. Meanwhile, FDI, interest rate, and trade openness have a positive relationship with CPI. That's all from me. We proceed with next presenter, Fadli.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fadli Fitri bin Fadlullah. I will continue this presentation with chapter 5. In chapter 5, we will focus on summary based on data from a prior study. This data is different from the prior one. This data came from the World Bank data stream and the Malaysian Department of Statistics webpage. For this study, we compiled the CPI index, FDI value, interest rate, trade openness, GDP, and exchange rate to determine their impact on Malaysian CPI. Each dataset spanned 15 years, from 2006 to 2020. Following this chapter are ideas or recommendations for improving future research quality. This study's results should be helped in future researchers get more exact results. As a conclusion, this research has been complete to establish the link between the CPI and other macroeconomic variables in Malaysia, like FDI, interest rate, trade openness, GDP, and exchange rate are other macroeconomic indicators. The 2006 to 2020 yearly data was taken from approved sources like DataStream. The interest rate, FDI, and other macroeconomic variables have substantial relationship to CPI fluctuation, according and EViews analysis. What can be found from the research is about the test result found out that real interest rate and FDI has significant relationship with the CPI index, since the probability is placed under 5% as a benchmarking. More than that, trade openness also described as the result also significant with the CPI index, but in lower impact under 90% due to the probability percentage of 6%, but still considered can be as significant because it's still lower from 10% result. According to previous research from Atta Shaban and Ali in 2019, also support that Jordan economy has also a significant relationship between real interest rate and CPI. However, the trade openness has lower impact toward the CPI in this study. Other study that done by Prayogo and Haryanto in 2020 said there is significant positive relationship between CPI and trade openness by using BECM model. Even though GDP and exchange rate has not significant impact in this study towards CPI index, other study from Hansen and Rand in 2006 believe that CPI inflow has related with the GDP growth, and also in Indonesia, the researcher also believe GDP has significant impact to the CPI, and also the same view The same view about the significance of the exchange rate also influence the CPI according to the same research. From my point of view, increase in CPI index indicate that high inflation rate will occur in future. However, high CPI index also will lead to the lowering of purchasing power of citizens in Malaysia. From my point of view, increase in CPI index indicate that high inflation rate will occur in future. However, high CPI index also will lead to the lowering of purchasing power of citizens in Malaysia.